Hello everybody, this is Milena from School of Data. I am very happy to welcome everybody to a School of Data skill sharing session on getting feedback from training events. I'm very happy to have here with me Rahul from Open Knowledge and our colleague Olu from Nigeria. Our fellow from Nigeria, unfortunately, he has some technical issues, but there he is, right on time to tell us a bit about what we're doing today. So this session is mostly for School of Data community. We run lots of data training events around the world, and we want to improve getting feedback. But really, I think it's relevant for anybody out there who is doing training events, workshops around data and technology, and wants to really master a bit more the skill of getting feedback before the workshop, being able to tailor an agenda to what people need, and also be able to follow up, learn from what happened, learn from the experience of the participants, and also capture important data. So with no further ado, I'd like to pass on the microphone to Rahul and Olu to introduce a bit themselves and to tell us what we'll do today and how we're going to spend this skill share. Rahul, you're muted and we can't hear you. Can you unmute?
Can you hear me now? Great. Welcome to the session, everyone, on feedback collection. Me and Olu have worked on a presentation for you. So before that, just to introduce myself, if you don't already know me, I work with Open Knowledge as the development manager, specifically working in M&E, in monitoring and evaluation of our projects. And currently, I'm working with the School of Data on evaluating the fellowship program. So I'll hand over to Olu to introduce himself.
Olu is also having some challenges with his internet connection, so if he won't be able to speak when sometimes just excuse us. It's sometimes internet and technology is not always on our side. Olu, can you hear us? Would you like to quickly introduce yourself? All right, so we'll do that a bit later when Olu has everything sorted with his internet. Rahul, would you like to kick off the presentation and tell people what we're going to do today?
Sure. So let me just share my screen. Okay, so let's go to the beginning. Right, so today we'd like to give you just kind of a context of how feedback works, because it works within the monitoring and evaluation system and kind of works within the system of your project, kind of the strategy and things like that. So we just want to give you a brief context, kind of the methodologies that you could possibly use to gather feedback, and then give you concrete tools that you could apply for your projects. Right, so one of the most common things that people face working in the nonprofit sector is, while they work with their projects, there is a pressing need to evaluate programs. And one of the common questions is, how do we do that? Program evaluation can be quite daunting, and even with squeezed resources, time and energy, often it can be ignored. But to prove to funders how we are progressing and whether our interventions are really making a difference, we need to have a proper system in place that can gather feedback from our beneficiaries. So that's a very good place to start when we think about evaluating programs. Evaluation of programs can be a very complex and has to be a structured process, but there's always, the best place to start is always gathering feedback. So just a second. Yeah, the third slide, so the third slide, Olu was supposed to explain to you in a practical way how feedback collection works, but I'm going to skip to the fourth slide.
Let's see, Olu, are you around? Can you hear us now? I'm gonna count to 3.
1, 2, 3, I'm here.
Yay!
Perfect.
Tell us everything, Olu. Start maybe introducing yourself a bit and then give us a bit your view on what we'll do today.
Yeah, okay. My name is Oludotun. I'm from Nigeria in Africa. I'm a monitoring and evaluation expert with Connected Development, and I run a project called Follow the Money, which uses open data to follow funds meant for local communities. So today we'll be looking at how we can get effective feedbacks from most of the trainings we do, especially with and on data itself. So that's me, and I hope you're going to enjoy this session. Thank you.
Excellent, Olu. So we are already on the slide with Patrick. Do you want to tell us a bit what we're seeing there and why this is relevant?
That's the story of Patrick, who sometimes in France, sometimes last year went for a training on swimming. So and you see people going for several trainings like this, and you every time they come, they pay.
Oh, the
training really. Can I now?
The sound is really bad, Olu. So I will try to resume a bit what you said. So this is the story of Patrick, and obviously none of us knows Patrick, and it's about an event that nobody knows which event is. And Patrick went there for data training, but he also learned how to swim, and he was swimming in the lake. And we obviously know that because we have pictures. But how do we know he can now swim since his last class? So it's about context. How do we gather information about what happened at certain events? And now I will pass on to Rahul to continue with the presentation. Olu, sorry, we have these technical challenges. I suppose internet is sometimes tricky, but let's continue with the presentation. Thank you, Rahul.
Right. So moving on to why we need to collect feedback for training events. There's a variety of reasons for that. As you can see on the So the various reasons for collecting feedback from training events, there could be other reasons as well, but the main reasons are to better plan training agendas according to audience and skill level, interests and expectations, understanding that so that you can tailor your agenda directly to the audience that's coming for a particular training, to understand which elements of a training worked, the effectiveness of it. So certain parts of your training might have more effectiveness than other parts. and which context, what reasons they worked is quite important to understand. And this comes all directly from the feedback of the people you train because they experienced it. To form a better understanding of the likely long-term effects of a training, sometimes you can ask them questions around what they want to use the skills that you have imparted to them for and what they would like to achieve. And you could follow up later to see if that kind of impact actually happened, or if it didn't happen, for what reasons it didn't happen, so that you can address that maybe in your training or through other means. And also to gather data for our own and our funders' monitoring and evaluations needs. Each program that is well structured should always point out what points it needs to measure according to, say, a log frame or a theory of change with selected indicators. It's important to understand also a successful training program is always a work in progress. The training cycle requires proper evaluation of training's effectiveness, which should be in the decision making and planning of future trainings. So it links up to the actual planning and the agenda setting of the trainings. There should be a proper feedback loop of the people you're training. You should be able to understand how you're helping them, how you can help them better, and that should feed into your program. Therefore, I mean, a useful information evaluation program needs to be part of your overall training operation. Moving to the next slide. There are various ways to collect feedback. Each of them have their strengths and weaknesses. Some of the main ones are surveys, interviews, focus group, through direct observation, or through recorded document reviews. So I'd like to speak a little bit about the kind of advantages and disadvantages of each of these main kind of things that you could use in the future to collect feedback. With surveys, in their cost in relation to the amount of data you can collect, it's a good balance. It's cheap, and they're considered efficient because you can distribute them to a large number of people at a relatively low cost, especially through the internet and things like that, through emails. There is a disadvantage to surveys. Sometimes the response rates can be low, and if you don't get enough of a sample, or if you don't get a proper selected sample, then you can jeopardize the validity of the data that's being collected. Moving on to interviews. Interviews use standardized instruments, but are conducted either in person or over telephone or Skype or things like that. Interviews can be quite similar to surveys. You have a set of questions, but it can help you explore things much more deeply. Mainly because you can ask questions to clarify any confusion. You can ask them to expand on their answers. So the depth of the information is usually much more than a survey can provide. The primary disadvantage of interviews, I would say, is it costs much more time and money. Often you may not have the resources or the time to do that. An interview reliability can be also problematic if you're not trained well in interviews. The kind of questions you ask matter, and the way you ask it matters, so that you don't bias kind of the responses and the information that you gather. The next one is focus groups. These are like small group-based discussions by defining kind of areas of interest that people can talk around. While interviews with individuals are meant to solicit data without any influence or bias from the interviewer, focus groups are quite different. There's a level of subjectivity and emotion that's allowed to play to get kind of richer qualitative data. The disadvantage to this is you can rarely generalize or apply that finding to the entire population. It is to explore deeper issues that you have identified generally. Observations is another way where you can capture behaviors, interactions, and because you see it physically and you observe it directly, it has it is valuable in that way. So the validity of that kind of data is usually very strong, but it again requires very well-trained people who understand how to observe without influencing the subject they're studying. The last one is document reviews. So if there is already systematic data collection in your program, so you could review those documents and try to come to kind of conclusions over various issues. So that's generally the feedback collection types. There's different designs as well for data collection, and they matter. These are things that you should be considering what is possible according to your resources, and also what is actually necessary for your thing. Sorry, I haven't moved to the next slide. Yeah. So the 5 kind of things that we could talk about generally is you could do pre and post measures. Generally, these are for things where you want to establish a baseline and you want to compare at the end of the program. For example, fellows who started on a program, if we wanted to know what is the change in skills over time before the fellowship till the end, we would need to make a measure at the beginning of the fellowship of some kind that benchmarks what their skill levels are, and at the end of the fellowship, take similar measures to compare what the change is. So that's for pre-post measures, but this is often much more complicated and may not be necessary for certain things. At other places, without establishing kind of a strict baseline, you can't come to a proper conclusion of what happened. The second one is post-only measures, which is quite logical following on from that. So data is only collected once at the end of the program, service or activity. Often it can be things like self-assessment, where you ask people, what did you find the changes? So therefore you didn't need to do a direct baseline because they themselves can compare the change and think back 6 months. Things like letter to self was kind of a tool to try and do that, where people set themselves a benchmark, but more strictly because that had a pre and a post measure. The third one is time series, where you collect at various times and also in the follow-up to measure the kind of increments of change. The fourth one is measuring with a comparison or control group. This is often for much more rigorous impact assessment programs, where you want to know for sure it's the intervention or the program that has made the change and not other factors. So therefore you need 2 groups. Like if we were to measure the change in the fellows, and if we wanted to do it on that strict and high level, then we would need another group similar to the fellows without the intervention conditions and compare if they went through similar changes or where they didn't go through the changes, and try to identify what reasons those changes happen. The last one is measures with a comparative standard. So sometimes, depending if the program is in a 2nd, 3rd, 4th year cycle, then you might have data already from the first set, which you could use as a benchmark and compare to that. So these are just the basics of kind of feedback collection before we go into the practical aspects of it and how you could use it currently. So yes, I'd like to give you all a chance to ask any questions so far, and maybe discuss with you all, like how you have been collecting feedback so far, what your evaluation needs are, and kind of the tools that you're interested to learn, and you feel you need to gather proper feedback.
So I think this is a specifically valid question for our current fellows. We're 4 months into the fellowship, and it's a bit late that we're introducing the feedback forms. So we'll later in the discussion we'll show you some templates that we've built for you. But many of you already ran a number of trainings, and many of you out there are running numerous trainings. And we're interested, how do people collect feedback at the moment? Are you using any forms? Do you change forms from workshop to workshop? Is there any input you can give us as to how you're collecting feedback at the moment and how you think that can be improved? Olu, do you want to try again? I know you're just preparing a training in December, no, at the end of the month now in November, and you collected some data through a pre-training survey. Do you want to tell us a bit about the questions you asked and what kind of data you were interested to collect from people to prepare your training events? Still breaking a bit, but try say something.
Can you guys hear me?
We can. It breaks a bit, but yeah, try. I will interrupt you if it doesn't work, okay? Go for it. Okay, so it doesn't work, but like we can get a comment from Nisha, our fellow from India. She's based in Bangalore and runs an organization called Data Meet, and they run quite a number of trainings. And she says that she usually asks feedback at the end of the workshop, and then sends a form few days. It seems to be okay. But she has questions how to keep engaging people in the workshop so that they feel their feedback matters. So I think it's a question about keeping the feedback loop open and showing people how you incorporate your feedback and so on. Rahul, are you going to touch a bit on that in your presentation, or shall we take this question now?
Not directly, we didn't have about how you can engage people, but we could take that question now maybe. We didn't have that in the kind of discussion in the presentation, but maybe we can ask what people think about this, because generally I understand that is a problem with getting feedback through, say, surveys. That the disadvantage is sometimes people don't reply or don't understand it, and you can only push so far. So there is a limitation there, that you won't get all the people who attended your training will not be necessarily replying to kind of your feedback form, even if you try to engage them. But I guess you need to engage them during the session. You need to take time out to speak about it. If possible, I don't know what the constraints are for each of the kind of training. You may not be able to ask them to fill it in right there, or things like that. In places where you can give a paper copy, you could put in the data if you want to ensure that you get the data. And there's other ways of feedback collection though. So actually face-to-face talking to them and saying, can I chase up? And because maybe they already have good feedback that you heard in the training, and you follow them up personally with the form. The ones that you know have proper feedback and were interested in doing that, trying to spot that in a training might be a way. But there's also other means, like Olu was going to touch on that, about, for example, giving a board during the session where people can pin up things which you could feedback into your, based on the kind of questions that you have from your feedback forms. You could take the most important ones and ask them to comment on it during the session and leave it open for the whole session. It could be a good way that you could feedback in a more limited way, but you could get feedback. But these are complicated issues that has to be dealt with, I think, during the particular context and the situation of the training.
Yeah, so Olu also wants to add to Nisha's question. So I think I see two aspects in the question, and I'll say a couple of words and then try to give back the mic to Olu. Hopefully it will work. I won't give up on you, Olu. I'll keep trying. So I think there are two things. There's how do we incentivize people to fill in our forms, and there are a number of tricks. I think first of all, it's much better to keep them in the room until they fill in the form. So I think sending it a few days later diminishes our chances to actually get people to complete it. And I think in my experience, if you do send it a couple of days later, what you'll do, you'll get only 20% of the answers. So try, my advice from having done some trainings before, keep 20 minutes at the end of your agenda. Don't fill up the day completely like we all used to. I think all of us do that. We have so little time, and we try as much as possible to give the time to learning and to teaching and stuff like this. But like, keep 20 minutes at the end of your agenda just for people to give you feedback. Ask them to take 5 minutes to fill in the form and have a conversation with them. I think that's the best incentive to get feedback. Do it on the spot. Another incentive that we're trying at the moment is giving a badge in exchange of people's feedback. So again, Rahul will show us the form at the end. So we will have a feedback form after the training that will be standardized, and it will be obviously translated in all languages we can possibly translate it in, but people will get a badge. So they give us feedback, and we give them a little badge at the end saying, hey, you've been School of Data or something, you've attended an awesome School of Data training, and they can keep these badges together with other online badges they receive for various trainings and courses and things like this. And I think the second aspect of Nisha's question was, how do we tell people that their feedback matters? How do we close the feedback loop? They told us how to improve. How do we communicate back to them, hey, we've listened to your feedback, we've improved, and we really care about your feedback. So I think it's all about keeping the communication open with your participants. And I think, Nisha, you're doing great at that. You have the mailing list, you have the website, you write blog posts after each event. Why don't we add in a blog post after our event the lesson learned? So here's what we learned from your feedback. Here is how we're going to change practices from your feedback. You told us it wasn't participatory enough. We'll make it more participatory. We'll try to approach this, and this feedback. And this is how we're going to change. So I think showing them that you've heard them and that you are going to improve will help people give you more feedback in the future. Olu, you said you want to add something. Do you want to try talking again?
I think you spoken or like getting to engage the participants. Sticky notes are very good in between.
Damn it, still doesn't work. We can't hear you well. Olu, do you want to type in the chat what you want to say, and I'll read it? And I have another comment from you from earlier on when you are asking what happens when you are invited for a training that you aren't allowed to prepare a feedback form or get feedback form. So again, this is something that we know. We're sometimes invited to run trainings, and we don't have this opportunity. We can't ask people to fill in a form because, I don't know, it's a weird organization, or for whatever reason, we don't have this luxury, if you want, to be able to say, we have a standard feedback form and we want to use this. So I think this is a super good question and a tricky one to answer because it all depends who you are working with. So if you work with an organization that's a little bit flexible, I would encourage you as much as possible to try to say, hey, we've thought a lot about this. We've put a lot of thinking in how to collect feedback. We have something that's ready-made. You don't have to lose any time doing another form. Why don't we use ours? So in the best case scenario, you can convince them to use your form. In the worst case scenario, you don't have any access to participants, and you'll have to make a lot of assumptions about what they care, what they like, what they don't like, and you have to be a super good trainer and adapt on the spot. So if you are preparing for a training and there's no way in hell you can contact participants, you have to be extremely open-minded and extremely flexible to adapt on the spot. And I'll give you an example, and I'll try to shut up soon because we have lots of slides to go through. We had a training at MOSFest with Yuandra last week. It was on cleaning messy data, and it was in an event with 2,000 participants. I think so, yeah, 1,700 participants to be precise. We had the space. We had no idea how many people will come to our session. We had no idea what people care about. We had no idea if it's going to be maybe 5 or 500 or 100 or what they want to learn. So we had to improvise on the spot. What we did is we did a very generic introduction with everybody, and then we broke them in groups as soon as we could by level. So we said, we can offer 5 stuff. We can offer data cleaning for beginners with Open Refine. We can offer for advanced people, we can offer how to do regular expressions, how to clean data with Python. So we were lucky enough to find many facilitators. And as soon as we could, we broke them down in super small groups for people to work in a cozy environment on things they care about. So be flexible. I think that's my only advice. If you can't have any access to participants, be flexible. Small groups are always a good idea. Rahul, I'm going to let you continue. Olu mentioned something about sticky notes, that they are cool for engaging in between trainings and for making your presentations happy. So send them reports of lessons learned. That's a very, very good comment. With this, I'll head back to Rahul to continue the presentation.
Okay, so we're going straight into talking about the 2 tools that we have created for you. But I think it's important to mention at this point that when we have created these forms, it's a first draft and kind of an iteration, and there should be a feedback loop for the feedback forms as well. In the sense that until it's tested, kind of obstacles and things that people face is inputted back into the kind of thinking that the feedback form has taken, it won't be as useful as it could be. So it's important to have feedback on the kind of tools that we use to get feedbacks. So I'd be interested in knowing not only what you think now, but at different stages as you find out things. It would be interesting to have that come back to us, and whenever we look at that, we try to input back whatever kind of learnings that you have over there. So the 2 tools is, one is a sample pre-training feedback form, and the second one is a standardized post-training evaluation form. So I've used kind of this terminology so that it's clear that for the pre-training feedback form, we are trying to get information that can feed into the agenda so that trainers can prepare better and tailor their agendas for their audience for that particular training. And to do that, every training is so kind of different that we needed to create a sample form and a guide so that you can adapt it. And the second one is a standardized post-training form, which we want to put on the School of Data website with translations, etc., because a lot of it is to do with the monitoring and evaluation needs of the program, and it's also to do with understanding the kind of things that worked, what kind of expected impacts or outcomes we expect in the longer run, and to kind of judge those kind of things. So for that, we need a standardized form because we need to collect the data in one place and be able to compare it. So having too many iterations or too many versions of that wouldn't work for us. Okay, so just to share the links. So for the pre-training form, sorry, Milena, how do I share these two links? Should I just
I'm
share the
pasting them in
presentation?
chat. Don't worry, Rahul. I'm going to share them now.
Okay, cool. So these are the two things. One is the sample form and one is the guide for adapting the forms. I'll be going through those things to explain kind of the rationale behind it, the different parts there are, and how you can adapt them. So, am I still sharing my screen?
We can see your face now, which is amazing as well.
No, let me get back to that. I'm sorry, I'm a bit technically challenged on these things.
No, it's lovely. I think it's lovely to alternate between slides and seeing you a bit. See who's behind the slides.
Right. Okay. So let me try to get back to the slides. You can see the slides now, right?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah, I mean, so these are the two links. The objective of this form, as I mentioned, was to provide trainers with understanding of the background, current skills, the interests, expectation of the participants, so that you can tailor things to that. So the rationale behind this was we worked on this a long time. I want you to understand, because at every stage there can be different considerations, and there is not one particular way that you can go that's right or wrong. We initially went for something. We wanted to go for something much more ambitious. So we were trying to have a pre and post form where we could measure changes in skills and knowledge of the participants before and after through kind of a self-rating system. However, by going through different resources and talking to experts, we realized that this kind of self-assessment may not be accurate, because if a person comes into a training and they don't know beforehand what is possible in that field, whatever data skills that you'll be teaching them, and they're not aware of it, they might rate themselves quite high. But afterwards, when they realize what is possible, they might rate themselves quite low, which would mean that it doesn't truly represent kind of the change in skills. So that's a much more complicated process. We try to separate the pre-form mainly for the agenda, post-form for understanding kind of the training and what works and what doesn't. So this template and guidelines, let me move to the next slide. Yeah, so these are the different parts of the training, parts of the feedback form for the pre-training. The first part, and I'm not sure if you can access the links directly, then you'll be able to see what I am referring to, but we have produced kind of a short email that you could send out to people if you are not doing it directly at the, because there's a pre-form, you won't have met the participants, so you can send an email out or any other means that's useful for you if you want to personally ask someone. But we have a longer version and a shorter version that you can use to ask them to fill in these feedback forms. We give it a week deadline so that they can come back to us, and then another week should be there for you to actually consider all the feedback that you get back and try to plan your agenda accordingly. So we would say on average, give it 2 weeks, and maybe even chase them up on the last day that you want it, because people tend to forget this kind of thing. And asking in a friendly way, again, would possibly increase chances of response. The second part asks for the personal and background info, like kind of but other demographic data that we need, we have left it for the post form. So it just asks for, you could ask things that you think are important for you. But keep it simple. If you don't actually need to ask a certain question, don't ask it, and don't make it compulsory that they have to put in their names, because sometimes they may not reply if they can't be anonymous. I think that should be left up to the person who's filling in the form. The third part is the skills section, and this is very important. To deliver a successful training, you need to be able to understand your audience, be able to adapt the agenda to the needs and skills of your participants. Mapping their existing skills is important, but there's many ways to do this. So what we have done is we have provided you in that template, in the guide, 2 different sets that you could look at to understand what kind of questions you could ask. The first one is a set of general questions based around the skills they would have. So if the training is very, very general and it's just addressing things just generally about data and open data, then maybe you could use something similar. But we'd ask you to there's a lot of skills listed there. Maybe try to list it to 8 skills. If you go for a longer list, people are often squeezed for time and may not fill in the form properly. So it's worth cutting it down to the shortest point, which can give you an idea of what the things are. If you are teaching a specific training on, say, statistics, then you would need to think about the specific topics you'll be covering. And we have given an example on that as well, but it won't apply to something else if it's not spreadsheets. Yeah, so this is the next section. Then other 3 or 4 sections that we have included are interest, expectations, tools, data, and communications. Now these can be a little bit more optional, and you might have to adapt it. We have added some sample questions there for the interest and expectations part. For the interest section, you would have to tweak this according to the training you're running and the topics you will cover. For expectations also, we have provided some general questions, but have a think around what information you want to gather that will specifically help you understand what participants want out of the workshop, and then adapt accordingly. Tools and data, even more optional, I would say, but it can be very helpful to understand what kind of softwares people are used to using, what kind of tools they want to learn, and the type of computers they're using, or maybe they want a specific data set to work around, which might be more practically useful for them. So questions like this can often be helpful, but you should limit your questions to the minimum level you need to tailor your training. The last one is communication, so you can understand the kind of marketing channels that have worked and better tailor those kind of things, and maybe not waste your time on the channels that don't work. So yeah, so these are the parts of the pre-training feedback form that you can adapt. At this point, if you have had a look at the link and look through the thing, take your time a little bit, and if you have questions or any discussion, or if you have ideas of what you think specifically might work for you, share that. That would be quite useful. Thank you.
All right, so Rahul, if I may just summarize very quickly what we discussed, is that the pre-training feedback forms are not standardized, so are for every one of you to customize for each training. You might need quite different information from training to training, so we created basically guidelines for you on how to create your pre-training feedback form and make it relevant for your audience. We also have a sample form that I'm beaming right now on my screen. So if you want to look at something that's kind of out of the box, that's kind of good for a generic training, you can obviously feel free to use this. At the top of the form, obviously, you have the link to the guide, so you can check again what kind of questions you might want to ask, if you want to go very generic, very specific, and so on. So customize, 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 make it relevant for your training. This is not a standard form. We will talk about the other form for the post-training feedback, which is more standardized. Any other questions from anybody else? No, okay, so let's go to the post. Oh, Nisha has a question. So this upcoming workshop, we're requiring people to fill out an application in order to attend, similar to this. So it will be good to see how they compare. So yeah, that's very good. Exactly. That's a good incentive to get some feedback before the training. Have an application where they have to answer a set of questions. So that's a very good trick to get people to fill in this pre-training feedback form. So remember, this is super useful to get to know your audience, to get to know what they care about, what kind of skills they want to learn, to get some contact details so you can remind them about the training and so on. So we'll, again, for you to customize, although you have a template that's almost ready to go, but look through it, look through the guidelines and make sure it works for you. Rahul, we have 15 minutes. Do you want to continue with the post-training feedback form?
Sure. Right. So yeah, so these are the two links to the standardized form. This will be added to the School of Data website, hopefully with as many translations as possible, so that you can just ask them to fill it in through the link. So now the objectives of the post-training evaluation form, as I touched on before, like we want to cover both things. One is gather information around monitoring and evaluation needs of our funders, kind of the background diversity information, location where the training was run, overall participant satisfaction, likely outcomes and impact. So the questions are based on this to kind of gather that kind of data, but it's also to gather participant feedback to improve our trainings, get their suggestions, and try to understand what different audience needs and expectations are and in which context. So the different parts that we have included here, as you can see, these are the various parts that we have included. So the first part is to gather the background and diversity information, event, name, gender, organization, professional sector, things like that. We have left most things to do with this not compulsory, even though we would encourage people to fill in these things, we can't really force them. So anonymous data is better than no data. Then the second part is rating the different aspects of our training, kind of what do you think overall training was like, the content, was it good, poor to excellent kind of range, and what do you think of the trainers and the venue. This gives us an easy way, because it's a fixed kind of data that we'll get, to map what overall satisfaction of trainings are for School of Data Fellows, or we could look at specific conditions, like in a certain place, the different kinds of trainings we ran, when was it more satisfactory for people, when was it less, and map that kind of information, because that's what funders want to see, that we are actually looking at things like that. But it's also for our own learnings at the end of the day. The most important thing learned is the next question. So these questions are meant to be more qualitative. It gives them a chance to expand on it. It's sort of like an interviewing technique where you ask a second question to ask them to elaborate. So you don't want yes or no answers only, normally, so that your data is put in the right context. And it gives them, after that, a chance to suggest changes, things that would work better. And after that, likely uses of new knowledge, skills. So this is to predict the outcomes. So if someone can say, I think I could use this for this specific project, it might be worth following them up in 6 months when they have done some amazing work, and say that, ask them, like, how did the data skills help, or generally to map what people want to use this kind of skills for. The last two boxes is, one is for them to fill in a brief testimonial. In this case, obviously, it'd be better if they fill in their name, so that we can attribute it to them. It's just to say this training was good or something like that. It's to share with others, and maybe one day we can build up a testimonial section on the website. And the last one is a permission to follow up specifically to ask about the impact of the project in the longer term. This is something we haven't focused on so much, on how we are systematically going to do this, but starting to gather that data and having a list of names of people who are interested and following up with them eventually would give us good impact stories, which is quite vital to tell the story of how we are making the change to the world. yeah, I had noted down here again, but I think it's worth remembering that to distribute the form or the link well before the end of the workshop, if possible. Maybe when they come in, just if you can hand it to them and take out some time to actually fill it with them at the end of the workshop, possibly. And if you can't do that, then follow up with them in a few days saying, we sent you the link, we'd very much appreciate this. And maybe talk during the session about, at the end, about why feedback is important, what it means that we can make a much better program for them. These are the changes we are trying to make. And we require, it's all about the people, and we require people to speak up about what's working and what's not.
So again, just to reinforce some of the concepts here, because they are quite new, this form, unlike the other one, the pre-training form, the post-training form will be standardized across all School of Data trainings. Why is that? Because we want to collect as much as possible data in a similar format, so we understand also programmatically, not just for each training, but also for School of Data as a program, how we do at trainings. So this form, it looks a bit like you've seen the link, but it looks a bit like that. I'm sharing my screen with you and show you how it looks like. So you have the questions that Rahul went through, and right now it lives in a Google Doc. But we don't want it to live in a Google Doc, because Google Docs are messy, and if everybody creates a different Google Doc, then we'll have like 50 responses forms, and it's going to be very, very hard for us to centralize this data. So what we are doing instead, we're going to share this form through our website. So we have right now schoolofdata.org/feedback, where we have an old form that we're obviously we've improved together with Rahul and Olu. So the feedback form for after your trainings will live here, schoolofdata.org/feedback/your language. So we want you guys to translate it in Spanish and in Macedonian and in Romanian and in whatever language works with your audiences. So you'll be able to give them the feedback form obviously in your language. We also have the perk of a badge, as I said before. So if people give us feedback, they will receive a small badge, a virtual badge, obviously, in exchange. So once they click send on this feedback, they will receive a badge from us. So this is standardized, but what we wanted to say is that you might have questions that you want to ask your audience after the training that are not in the feedback form. So how do you do that? How do you get other types of feedback that are not in the feedback form? So I know Olu prepared a couple of examples of how you can do that. Shall we try again, Olu? Are you still there? Do you want to try again to talk about, we have just a few minutes left, but just to talk about other means of getting feedback. If people feel like the feedback form is not enough, if they want to ask other questions, how can they get still the feedback from people, given that the feedback form might be sometimes restrictive?
Yeah, like I already said, yeah, you can use the sticky notes. It's a very good one that you can use in quickly collecting feedbacks, and some of the questions that you have on the form itself can go on sticky notes, and yeah, you can use that as a breakout session for them, or as a breakout session. The other one is you observing if you want to be a very good trainer, I think you need to observe your participants as much as possible. Observe the way their body language, observe what they do whenever you're saying something. Is good. How do you feel about scripting? Do you know how to do that now? So these three things are quite they're quite important as aside you up in the form, because you're going to be doing trainings in places where you don't have something happen to the forms you're carrying from your place or
Okay, so I think it interrupted. We could hear you a bit, but just in case people couldn't hear that well what you were saying, let me recap a bit. So we can use sticky notes. So have a quick exercise with people, ask some questions like, what was the most valuable thing you've learned in this training? What is the one suggestion for improvement you can give us? And give people sticky notes and have a quick brainstorming exercise in the room with the sticky notes. So you still collect this valuable information. He also suggested observing our participants, which is super important. Look at their body language, look if they feel uncomfortable. Be attentive to what they are telling you without voice in the training, and try to adapt to that. He also told us, I think, I'm not sure if I understood well the last question, the last point, but you might go to trainings where internet is not very good. So obviously our forms right now are online. So what you can do, and we will provide you a printable version of the feedback form. So you can still ask them to fill in the form on paper, the good old traditional ways. And yes, Olu mentioned interviews. Very good. Try to talk to some people. Just get them aside and ask some more in-depth question. Have a longer conversation with them, and try to see what kind of deep suggestions they give you for change. This is super useful. Thanks for mentioning, Olu. And again, sorry it breaks. Like we could hear you a little bit, and we'll keep trying. Are there any other? We just have 3 minutes left. Anybody else wants to mention any other way of getting feedback? Any other cool exercise that you're doing? Any other cool exercise that you're doing with in your workshops to get feedback? Rahul, do you want to tell us what's the beautiful boat about?
No, that's just a closing slide. I just thought, yeah, it's just to say that it's important that not only we collect the feedback, but actually use that and have a proper system that we review it, because often enormous amounts of data are collected and then not analyzed in a systematic manner, and then it's not really useful.
True. So let's 2 more minutes. Anybody has any closing remark, any question, or anything that you'd like to talk about? So there are a couple of people in this hangout that will have trainings coming up at the end of the month. So guys, please stay in touch with us. Let's work together. Let's make sure you have proper forums and you know how to collect feedback and to start really listening to our participants and what they want from us and tailor a bit more our trainings to their needs. So if nobody has any further questions, I think we're done for today. So I would like to thank all of you for participating, especially thank Rahul and Olu for preparing this amazing presentation, for preparing the forums, and for working so hard to make us be able to collect more feedback. Rahul, do you want to say anything closing?
Yeah, is my microphone right? Yeah, I just wanted to say, please be in touch. I mean, I wanted to say that it's important that I work with you all to understand what's working and what's not, and in any way when you're adapting things and whatever it is that you need, I'm happy to work and try and figure out ways to overcome hurdles that we might come across, because no one form can be possibly perfect for everyone and in every situation. So it's all about adapting different things. And the other thing, while this sounds like it's specifically for School of Data, this is the first time we are trying to make an evaluation system, as far as I know, like a proper one. And I am hoping that the kind of learnings will reflect all around open knowledge and be useful, not just for open knowledge, but maybe as best practices for others, creating toolkits and things. And that was the big ambitious aim that we have, that we can sort of set things that could be very useful for other people working in this kind of sector trying to change the world.
Excellent. Again, thanks everybody for attending. We'll obviously write a blog post and we'll link these resources again and make sure you have access to them. And yeah, happy feedback collection. Bye everybody.